Just imagine the entire area that you see here at an elevation of over 9,000 feet is riding on a column of magma 9,000 feet high, which is forced upwards by increasing pressure that is building up within the core of the Earth. There are enormous forces involved here. The period from 2004 to 2008, in which the main uplift occurred, coincides with a steep increase in solar cosmic ray flux, as we see it here measured in proxy by the Moscow Neutron Monitor. While cosmic rays collide with the atmosphere, and the collisions produce neutrons along the way, not all of the cosmic rays are captured in the atmosphere. With the cosmic rays being protons, they become absorbed into the ground and reach all the way to the core, where they increase the plasma density of the core, and with it the plasma pressure in the core. The increased pressure causes the core to expand, which puts pressure onto the magma of the mantle. This pressure uplifts the Yellowstone caldera and also puts pressure onto the volcanoes and on the crust of the Earth all around the Earth. In this time frame, encircled here, in which solar cosmic ray flux increased tremendously, an amazing number of world historic volcanic eruptions and earthquakes have happened, as I had previously indicated. The list of only 10 events contains 2 of the 3 most powerful earthquakes known, greater than 9 in magnitude, and some of the most deadliest and destructive of them. Among them we also find a swarm of 500 earthquakes occurring at Yellowstone in a single month in 2009, and another huge swarm of 1,600 earthquakes in early 2010. It all began in 2004 with the Indian Ocean super-earthquake 170 kilometers offshore from northern Sumatra. The quake erupted 30 kilometers below sea level. The undersea quake raised a huge tsunami that was felt as far away as South Africa and Antarctica, and hit the shoreline of Indonesia with a 33-foot high wave of water that destroyed everything in its path. It left behind it 227,000 people dead. A year and a half later, in 2006, on the island of Java in Indonesia, a large earthquake hit the Yogyakarta region. It killed 5,700, injured 38,000, and displaced over 600,000 people. A few weeks later, the nearby volcanic eruption of Mount Merapi happened. Because the eruption was expected and civil defense measures had been implemented, only 2 casualties had resulted. 2 years later, in 2008, in far-off China, the biggest and one of the deadliest earthquakes in Chinese history occurred. The earthquake erupted on a wide front with 42,000 aftershocks in the wake. It caused the death of 87,000 people injured 374,000 and left 4.8 million people homeless. We are seeing the effects here of enormous forces building up pressure from the core of the Earth. And the timing suggests that the pressure was built up by effects related to the Sun. In the same year still, halfway around the world, the La Llama volcanic eruption in Chile occurred. A 10,000-foot tall volcano blew its top. Imagine the pressure it takes to lift a 10,000-foot column of liquid rock and blow the top of a mountain. These enormous forces that produce those types of pressures, and because those pressures are global in nature, they must have an enormous cause standing behind them. Effects that are related to the dynamics of the Sun are evidently big enough to qualify for such a cause, and they do qualify as effects of the plasma core principle. The pressure that erupted in Chile was apparently the same pressure that half a year later caused a swarm of 500 earthquakes to rattle the Yellowstone caldera thousands of kilometers to the north, which by then had been raised up by a whopping 20 centimeters as the result of enormous pressures building up from below. The cause for the earthquake swarm is the same type of pressure build-up that one would expect when increased cosmic ray flux in the form of high-energy protons showers the Earth. As they filter into the core of it, they increase the proton density there, and with it, they increase the proton pressure that inflates the core. Later, in the same year of the earthquake swarm in Yellowstone Park, the Great Sumatra earthquake erupted halfway around the world. Obviously, it is the same pressure that uplifts the tall volcanoes, which also causes the earthquakes when the pressure from the core acts against the plates of the crust of the Earth and causes havoc in places where the plates are grinding together. The ring of fire is where the crustal plates interact and cause earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Indonesia is one of those places. When the pressure builds up, that's where the action will be felt. And the action was felt in a big way in Haiti less than a year later, in January 2010. A huge earthquake happened there, even though Haiti isn't situated on the Ring of Fire. Although the Haiti earthquake wasn't extremely high on the Richter scale, it ranks among the deadliest of all times. The damage was enormous because the earthquake erupted right in the middle between 4 cities. 5 days later, far to the north in Yellowstone Park, another swarm of earthquakes began to rattle the caldera region. It caused 1,620 quakes in the time frame of less than half a month. That's the largest swarm ever. Still in 2010, less than a month later, the famous 8.8 magnitude Chile earthquake happened far to the south. The earthquake erupted offshore and distant from the capital city by 170 kilometers. so that the city suffered only minor damages, like a partially collapsed high-rise tower. Nevertheless, this earthquake was so big that it produced 20,000 aftershocks that were felt over a wide region. Then a month later, still in 2010, in March, the big Iceland volcanic eruption happened that ejected so much volcanic ash into the atmosphere that air traffic had to be halted in many European regions. And as if this was not enough, the big Japan earthquake erupted a year later, in March 2011. The Big Japan earthquake was the third of the big magnitude 9 earthquakes in all history. It became famous for the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster that the earthquake had caused. The other two magnitude 9 earthquakes were the Indian Ocean earthquake in 2004 and the big Alaska earthquake in 1964. The Alaska earthquake was also the only super earthquake that occurred outside the time frame of the Yellowstone caldera rising. All of these big world historic events happened during the years of the increasing cosmic ray flux from the Sun that apparently had increased the pressure in the core of the Earth. The result of the increased pressure was felt all over the world and had pushed the Yellowstone caldera upwards by more than 20 centimeters. Most of the big world historic events had occurred from 2006 on, when solar cosmic ray flux had reached a new high level and had continued to increase until 2011. Early in this time frame, the weakening of solar activity, which is linked with increasing solar cosmic ray flux, became visually apparent with the development of solar coronal holes. Up to 2007, coronal holes were rare. The first big ones made headline in 2007. Now coronal holes are daily events and are larger in size. After 2011, the cosmic ray flux from the Sun began to diminish again, and things became quieter on the scene of the world historic events. But not for long. From 2015 on, the solar cosmic ray flux began to increase again. A new era of increasing pressure from the core of the Earth began with it. The first big earthquake in this new era, after 2015, erupted in Indonesia in 2018 in Sulawesi. This new quake in Indonesia is counted as one of the deadliest since the 2006 Yogyakarta earthquake. Another big eruption in 2018 occurred in Hawaii on the Big Island, where several fissures had opened up with vast streams of lava flowing across 12 kilometers of land. The new lava covers 35 square kilometers of land and even extended the shoreline by a few kilometers in some areas. And this too appears to be just another beginning. In 2018 and 2019, far off Alaska began rumbling again with earthquakes. We will most certainly see another wave of big events happening over the coming years as the solar cosmic ray flux continues to rise to ever greater volumes, inflating the core of the Earth further and further, whereby ever more pressure is being generated from within the Earth's core. Thus, as the saying goes, we haven't seen anything yet, because we have not experienced very large increases in solar cosmic ray flux in modern time, as we experience now, and will experience in the near future with corresponding consequences. We have seen large increases before, with large effects occurring, but those were rare. For example, when the solar global warming peaked in the 1960s, and the reversal began, as we see it in the sunspot numbers, the reduced solar activity would have had correspondingly produced significantly larger volumes of cosmic ray flux. It was in this period of the large-scale reversal of solar activity after the 1960s until its recovery in the 1980s, when two very large earthquakes occurred. The first of these was the large Alaska earthquake in 1964. It occurred early on the steep downslope during the solar minimum between cycle 19 of the 1960s and cycle 20 of the 1970s. And the second big event on the steep downslope before the sun recovered again was the 1976 Tangshan earthquake in China. Both of these events were extremely large-scale events. The Alaska earthquake was the first of the only 3 magnitude 9 events that ever occurred. The increasing pressure in the Earth had ruptured a 970-kilometer-long fault line at once, where stresses had built up for 500 years. A 220-foot-high tsunami wave developed that reached all the way to Antarctica in 20 hours. Surprisingly, the casualties were few. The opposite was the case when during the next solar minimum the immensely destructive 1976 Tangshan earthquake occurred in China. It became the deadliest earthquake in Chinese history. The earthquake occurred only 12 kilometers below the industrial city of Tangshan, a city of 1 million people. It occurred on July 28 at 3:42 in the morning. Minutes later, the city had ceased to exist. 80% of all buildings had collapsed or became unusable. The casualties were so high that estimates vary greatly, from 250,000 to 750,000. After the 1970s, the solar activity recovered, with less solar cosmic ray flux flowing from the sun. Solar activity leveled off till the 1990s, when the solar activity collapse began anew. Further back in history, the biggest volcanic eruption was the 1850 Tambora eruption. It also occurred during a solar minimum period, the Dalton minimum period of the 1800s. In these minimum periods, larger volumes of solar cosmic ray flux had showered the Earth, which had increased the proton pressure in the Earth's core. Mount Tambora in Indonesia had been 4,000 feet taller before the 1915 eruption, with a distinct conical shape. It had stood 14,100 feet tall as one of the tallest peaks in Indonesia. It was reduced by the eruption to 9,350 feet. The pressure that is required to restart a 14,000-foot tall volcano typically exceeds what a volcano's structure can withstand. Most major volcanoes are in the 9,000-foot to 10,000-foot range. In the case of Tambora, the built-up pressure had destabilized the sides and blew the top off. The sound of the explosion was heard 2,600 kilometers away on April the 11th. The estimated death toll was 71,000 people. The eruption had caused global climate anomalies, so that the year 1816 became known as the year without a summer. The impact on the North American and European weather had caused crop failures in the Northern Hemisphere that had caused the dying of livestock. Out of it came the worst famine of the century. Several solar cycles after the Tambora volcano, and again during a period of high volumes of solar cosmic ray flux, the volcano Krakatoa erupted with a super explosion, possibly the largest explosion of all times. The 1883 Krakatoa eruption explosion is estimated at 200 megatons of TNT equivalent, all going off at once. That's about 13,000 times the explosive force of the Hiroshima bomb. The explosion had ejected 25 cubic kilometers of rock and dust. It is believed to have been heard 3,600 kilometers away in Australia, and on the island of Rodriguez 4,700 kilometers distant. During the most recent eruption, in the modern time of high volumes of cosmic ray flux showering the Earth, in 2018, the height of the entire island had collapsed from over 1,300 feet above sea level to a mere 361 feet, with a subsequent tsunami happening. The coincidence of large-scale volcanic and seismic events with times of high volumes of cosmic ray flux would seem amazing if it wasn't for the plasma core theory that translates cosmic ray protons into plasma pressure in the core of the Earth. This coincidence is a general pattern that can be traced back in time as far as we care to take it. The famous volcano Vesuvius is an example of the principle of the sun affecting the core of the Earth. Vesuvius is a small but well-known volcano. It had erupted in a big way in the year 79 AD and 36 times thereafter in 3 distinct periods. The big eruption occurred during the low solar activity period after the end of the Roman warming pulse. This cold period, caused by low solar activity, would have been a period of high cosmic ray flux. The volcano Vesuvius erupted a few times in this period. It erupted 3,000 times thereafter in 3 separate periods, which were all cold periods with high volumes of solar cosmic reflux. Vesuvius became completely dormant for 600 years between the last 2 eruption periods. The dormant period coincides generally with the medieval warming period, a period of low cosmic reflux. The next active period began in 1631, right in the middle of the mountain minimum of the Little Ice Age, which was a period of high volumes of cosmic reflux. Vesuvius remained active from then on until 1944, in the modern global warming period. The general coincidence in timing tells us that the eruption of Vesuvius was significantly affected by changes in solar activity levels, which are reflected in changes of cosmic reflux density. When we look still further back in time, deep into the last ice age, another significant coincidence pops into view. It is believed that the last big Yellowstone eruption occurred 70,000 years ago, in the middle of the last ice age. For this time, a large increase in cosmic reflux has been measured in ice samples in Antarctica. The increase is measured in ratios of beryllium-10 that is produced by cosmic ray interaction with the atmosphere. It is further believed that the bottleneck type of mass extinction of humanity had occurred in that time frame, 70,000 years ago. The bottleneck event was likely caused by the known Yellowstone supervolcanic eruption from that period. The Yellowstone eruption may have been triggered by an extreme cosmic ray-induced expansion of the plasma core of the Earth. Bottleneck-type mass extinctions are rare, caused by extreme climate anomalies that affect plant growth. When plant growth becomes disabled by climate effects, food becomes scarce. Much of humanity might have died in such times by severe starvation. These times are referred to in archaeology by their effects as population bottlenecks. A still earlier Yellowstone supereruption is believed to have occurred 150,000 years ago, during the previous ice age. This eruption too had occurred in the general time frame in which a known mass extinction population bottleneck occurred. Archaeology tells us that only a few people had survived this bottleneck at the southern tip of Africa, in a place called Pinnacle Point. While we don't have measured proof that the Yellowstone eruption 150,000 years ago was caused by extreme volumes of cosmic reflux showering the Earth, it is reasonable to assume that this was the case. My supporting work that stands behind the series is a resource that provides further details that you may wish to explore.
人脚下泡涌浪飞旋，为梦想启程，高扬起风帆，我们同船渡破浪向前，激流勇进在潮头之巅，看新天无惧间重现新世界的旅途，美丽又遥远，我们公开闯锋望无限，扬帆未来，我们携手向前，迎接新日出，未来就在眼前。扬帆未来，我们携手向前，迎接新日出，未来就在眼前。一帆风顺是彼此心愿，愿时光停留这瞬间，让圆圆的月亮托起我祝福，友谊的海洋宽阔无边，心心相印，像幸福彼岸，愿相